Aisha Malik wakes before sunrise in a small apartment that carries the smell of old books and coffee stains on her desk. She works as an investigative reporter in a city where power belongs to a few and truth is treated as a threat. Every morning, she reminds herself that journalism is not just a job, but a duty to the people who cannot speak for themselves. She ties her hair, grabs her notebook, and walks to the office through narrow streets crowded with vendors and tired workers. Her newspaper is small, with limited resources and no powerful sponsors, but it has something more valuable than money. It has independence. Aisha and her colleagues survive through grants and subscriptions. Their office is on the third floor of a fading building with flickering lights and cracked walls. But inside, the atmosphere is full of purpose. The team respects Aisha because she chases stories that others avoid, stories that involve corruption, misused funds, fake contracts, bribery, and threats, stories that might get someone hurt. Aisha has been tracking a trail of suspicious contracts awarded to a network of businessmen who have close ties to influential politicians. She obtained leaked documents showing inflated pricing on public works projects and reports of taxpayers' money being stolen through fake companies. Every page she examined made her heart heavier because the scale of corruption was massive. Entire roads were reported as completed, but citizens still walked through mud. Hospitals claimed to buy modern equipment, but patients lay on rusted beds with no machines. Classrooms existed on paper, but were empty lots in reality. As Aisha gathers evidence, she understands the danger. She keeps encrypted drives, uses secure calls, and meets sources in public spaces where no one pays attention. One of her key sources is a government clerk who suffered greatly after refusing to sign fraudulent bills. He lost promotions and endured harassment, but eventually contacted Aisha because he wanted the truth exposed. They meet in a quiet tea shop where the clerk hands her a small flash drive and whispers that it contains proof of forged signatures and offshore accounts linked to senior officials. Returning to the office, Aisha plugs the drive into a secured laptop. She scrolls through spreadsheets, listings of wire transfers, scanned invoices, and emails with hidden messages. The evidence is enough to build a major investigative report. Her editor, an older man with silver hair and a cautious tone, tells her to be careful. He warns her that once she publishes such a story, powerful people will not stay silent. But Aisha has already accepted that journalism has consequences, and silence serves corruption only. After weeks of verification, fact-checking, and testimonies, Aisha prepares the first article. It outlines how millions of public funds were funneled into shell companies owned by politicians' relatives and business partners. It names individuals and lists locations of fake schools and clinics. She writes with precision and courage, avoiding sensationalism and sticking only to proven facts. When the article goes live on the newspaper website, the reaction is immediate. Within hours, the story spreads across social media. Thousands praise her bravery, demanding investigations and justice. However, praise is followed by backlash that arrives quietly at first. An unknown voice calls her during dinner and says she should drop the case for her own good. At night, a car waits outside her building for several hours without moving. The next day, her editor receives messages from advertisers threatening to withdraw support if the story continues. Aisha feels the weight of these signs but refuses to stop. She believes that journalism without risks is merely public relations, and she is not a public relations officer. Her family soon learns about the threats. Her mother begs her to leave the job and work somewhere safer. Her younger brother asks if she's in trouble and why bad people are angry with her. Aisha comforts them, saying she is fine, even though inside she feels a storm. She hides fear behind determination because she knows if she retreats, the story will die and corruption will win. Her city already suffers from broken systems and stolen futures. She does not want to contribute to that suffering by remaining silent. As days pass, hostile attacks increase. Online trolls call her a traitor and accuse her of being funded by foreign agencies. Talk shows hosted by propaganda-driven anchors mock her work and claim she is destabilizing the country. Instead of responding, Aisha channels her energy into further investigation. She meets another whistleblower, this time a junior engineer from the construction sector. He reveals that inspections were forged and equipment purchases never occurred. He gives her photos, audio recordings, and access to internal messaging groups used by contractors. Aisha compiles everything into a second wave of reporting. This time, she intends to expose the masterminds behind the network, not just the surface-level collaborators. Her editor supports her, although with visible anxiety. He remembers other journalists who faced threats, or worse, for challenging the powerful. He worries that Aisha might end up on that list. But Aisha believes that journalism without accountability is meaningless. If citizens never learn the truth, they cannot demand change. She wants her work to help them see clearly what is hidden behind polished speeches and staged ceremonies. One night, as she leaves the office, she notices a black sedan slowly trailing her. She changes directions several times and confirms it is following her. She walks into a crowded market and waits until the vehicle drives away. She feels her hands tremble, but she breathes deeply and reminds herself that fear is natural. She refuses to let fear control her. She goes home, writes notes about the incident, and considers reporting it to the police, but hesitates because she knows some police officials are connected to the same network she is exposing. Instead, she increases her own precautions. She begins sharing her location with trusted colleagues, sets up emergency contacts, and encrypts all her files. She attends a digital security workshop and learns methods to protect sources through anonymity. This increases her confidence, because preparation reduces vulnerability. With each new measure, she feels more capable of handling threats, though she knows they will not disappear. Despite everything, Aisha senses something important. The more they try to scare her, the more it proves her story matters. If her reports were false, no one would bother to silence her. The attempts to intimidate her only confirm the accuracy of her work and strengthen her resolve. The morning after the black sedan incident, Aisha arrives at the newsroom earlier than usual. The building corridors are silent, and her footsteps echo against the walls. She sits at her desk and opens her laptop, reviewing notes from her sources. She knows the next phase of her investigation will lead her closer to the core of the corruption network and further into danger. Yet, she feels a strange calm, a clarity born from knowing that the truth has weight and that someone must carry it. Her editor arrives shortly after and hands her a stack of printed papers. These are tip-offs from readers who claim they have witnessed similar corruption in nearby districts. Some reports describe schools that exist only on paper. Others talk about roads that were built one year and broken the next because the contractors used cheap materials. Aisha realizes that the story is bigger than a single network. It is a system that thrives because no one has challenged it effectively until now. She decides to travel to one of the villages mentioned in the reader reports. She packs her notebook and camera and catches a bus heading out of the city. The journey takes several hours, through dusty roads lined with fields and small houses. When she reaches the village, she's greeted by a group of frustrated locals. They show her a piece of land that was listed in government reports as a fully functional primary school. In reality, it is an empty patch of dirt surrounded by a collapsing fence. Children play nearby, but they attend class under a tree with a volunteer teacher because no building was ever constructed. Aisha interviews the villagers, asking when the funds were allocated, who visited the area, and whether any officials inspected the site. An elderly man explains that government representatives came once, took photos, and left, promising that construction would begin soon. After that, no one returned. This testimony confirms that the corruption is not just financial, but structural. It denies education to children, health care to patients, and dignity to workers. Aisha records every detail, storing it later in an encrypted drive. She returns to the city with fresh urgency and starts organizing her findings. She maps the fake projects, linking them to shell companies. The same names keep reappearing in documents and contracts. She identifies a mastermind, a powerful businessman who has maintained relationships with ministers, contractors, and foreign investors for over a decade. His public persona is philanthropic, donating to charities and attending high-profile events. But behind the scenes, he orchestrates massive theft from public funds. Aisha drafts the second report, but before publishing, she needs one more piece of evidence: proof that money flowed from government accounts into offshore firms. She calls her clerk source and asks if he can access bank records. The clerk hesitates, fearing he may lose his job or face harassment, yet he agrees because he believes in what Aisha is fighting for. Several days later, he sends her encrypted files through a secure platform. The files show millions transferred to accounts in a small island nation known for banking secrecy. Aisha knows she cannot publish sensitive financial data without verification. She contacts financial analysts and anti-corruption experts from an international watchdog. She uses code names and secure calls. They confirm the transfers indicate fraud and embezzlement. Their involvement gives her story credibility and protection, because once international experts are linked to the case, silencing a reporter becomes more complicated and more visible. During this time, the harassment intensifies. Aisha receives dozens of threatening messages. Some warn her to stop, others insult her character and question her patriotism. She ignores them until one message contains her home address, followed by a photo of her younger brother walking back from school. A cold fear grips her chest. She rushes home, checks on her family, and locks the doors. Her mother is terrified and begs her to leave journalism. Aisha cannot bring herself to reveal the full details to avoid increasing their fear. That night, she sits alone in the living room thinking deeply. She considers quitting for the first time. She wonders whether exposing corruption is worth risking the people she loves. She imagines a different life, as a safer writer or an office employee, where no one cares enough to threaten you. But then she remembers the clerk who risked his career to give her evidence, the villagers whose children study under trees, and the whistleblower who said he had no one else to speak to. She realizes that if she steps back, the powerful will win, and ordinary citizens will lose. The next morning, she calls her editor and tells him about the threat. They hold a long discussion and decide to contact an international press freedom organization. Within days, Aisha receives guidance on digital security, emergency planning, and legal protocols. The organization assigns her a case officer who checks in weekly. This gives Aisha a sense of safety, even if the situation remains dangerous. With renewed resolve, she finalizes the second report. It is far larger and more direct than the first. It names the mastermind businessman, outlines the list of fake projects, maps shell companies, and shows offshore transfers without publishing raw bank data for legal reasons. Her editor reviews it thoroughly. They agree that facts must remain pure, no exaggeration, no assumptions, only verified material. Once ready, they schedule publication for early morning to catch maximum readership before political machinery can react. When the report goes live, the impact is explosive again. Citizens flood social media demanding accountability. Opposition politicians hold press conferences asking for inquiries. The business tycoon denies involvement through a carefully crafted statement, but refuses to answer questions from journalists. Pro-government media attempts to discredit Aisha, claiming she's causing instability. Party spokesmen accuse her of pushing an agenda. However, something different happens this time. International media outlets pick up the story, quoting Aisha's work. Global press freedom groups post statements of support. Analysts discuss the case on foreign news programs. The businessman and politicians cannot simply smear her into silence anymore because too many outside eyes are watching. As attention grows, Aisha continues working quietly at her desk. She knows exposure does not guarantee safety, but it creates barriers against covert harm. She organizes her notes for a potential third report, focusing on the judiciary and law enforcement roles in sustaining corruption. Meanwhile, lawsuits begin to appear against her newspaper. Filed by businessmen and politicians, they accuse her of defamation and spreading misinformation. These lawsuits are designed to drain time and resources, a tactic known as lawfare, but Aisha and her team are prepared. Press lawyers volunteer support, and the cases attract more media coverage, inadvertently strengthening her credibility. Threats shift from physical intimidation to legal and psychological warfare. Aisha starts feeling exhausted. She barely sleeps and often forgets to eat. She spends hours reviewing documents, responding to lawyers, and drafting new material. One evening, as she leaves the office, she notices the same black sedan parked across the street. She stares at it without flinching. This time, instead of fear, she feels anger. She takes a photo of the vehicle, its plate number clearly visible, and sends it to her contact at the Press Freedom Organization. They advise her to report the incident and to relocate temporarily if necessary. Aisha goes home and speaks with her family. She tells them they need to stay somewhere else for a while for safety reasons. Her mother cries but agrees. Her brother tries to act brave, asking if she will return when the bad guys are gone. Aisha hugs him close and promises that truth always wins, even if it takes time. For the first time, she feels like her family truly understands the weight of what she carries. Aisha arranges for her family to stay with relatives in a quieter part of the province. She watches them pack clothes and essentials into small bags. Her mother keeps wiping her eyes while pretending not to cry. Aisha feels guilt press against her ribs, but she knows this temporary separation is the safest choice. When they leave, she remains standing in the doorway until the car disappears around the corner. The apartment feels emptier than before, but at least she can focus without fear of someone harming her family. With her loved ones safe, she returns to the newsroom, determined to push forward. Her editor informs her that subscriptions and donations have increased since the second report. Citizens who trust her work are sending support messages and money to keep independent journalism alive. Their office may have cracked walls and flickering lights, but now it thrives with purpose. The team feels like they are witnessing history, the kind of moment when journalism shapes reality rather than just recording it. Aisha spends the next few days reviewing patterns between financial documents and government contracts. She sees how corruption does not begin and end in one office. It flows through different levels like a hidden river. The mastermind businessman organizes the fake tenders, politicians approve them, corrupt officials sign them, engineers certify fake inspections, and law enforcement ignores complaints because they serve the same system. It is not a single crime. It is a network where each player protects the other in exchange for money, power, or influence. She interviews a former police officer who left the force after refusing to manipulate evidence in a corruption case. He meets Aisha in a quiet cafe with dim lights and sits facing the door, as if expecting someone to follow. He explains that whistleblowers often tried reporting fake contracts, but their complaints disappeared inside the system. He says files would be lost, witnesses would be intimidated, or judges would delay hearings until the public forgot about them. Hearing his story strengthens Aisha's commitment to exposing the entire structure of corruption, not just its visible tip. Meanwhile, the corruption network starts to panic. Aisha's sources tell her that officials are holding closed-door meetings, trying to identify who leaked documents to her. They accuse each other and suspect everyone. They consider arresting her on some vague charge like national security or breach of confidentiality. However, the international attention surrounding Aisha has complicated their plans. Foreign journalists are now monitoring the situation, and human rights organizations are mentioning her name in their reports. Any move against her would create backlash that the government cannot easily contain. Despite this pressure, Aisha is not entirely safe. One evening, as she walks home, a motorbike slows beside her, and the rider throws a small piece of paper at her feet before speeding away. Aisha picks up the paper and reads the message. It warns her that journalists who dig too deep are buried deep. She folds the paper, places it in her bag, and continues walking without looking back. She refuses to allow her enemies the satisfaction of seeing fear on her face. Later, at home, she opens her laptop and writes detailed notes about the threat. She photographs the paper, uploads it to a secure drive, and encrypts it for evidence. She cannot rely on the police because part of the system she is fighting involves law enforcement. Instead, she reports the incident to the Press Freedom Organization. They advise her to travel with colleagues and avoid predictable routines. She follows their guidance as much as possible, changing routes and never leaving the office alone at night. The legal attacks intensify. Multiple lawsuits claim that she defamed respected businessmen, damaged the national interest, and intentionally destabilized the economy. The claims are absurd, but designed to consume mental energy and time. Her editor attends court hearings while Aisha works. The hearings are often delayed or postponed, a tactic used to exhaust journalists and their publications. Lawyers, funded by powerful donors, attempt to overwhelm her small newspaper with paperwork and demands, but volunteers from legal aid groups provide support. During this time, Aisha receives a message from a major international newspaper asking for an interview. They want to highlight her work and the danger faced by investigative journalists in her country. Aisha hesitates because publicity increases both safety and risk. It makes her too visible for disappearance or covert arrest, but also attracts more hostility from those who see her as a threat. Eventually, she agrees because she believes in transparency. The interview is published and sparks global discussion about corruption and press freedom. Citizens in her own country share the article with pride, while her enemies watch with growing frustration. As Aisha prepares material for her third major report, she discovers an unexpected connection. A company that supplies construction materials for government projects is partly owned by the mastermind businessman. Through this company, they sell low-quality materials at inflated prices. Engineers falsify inspection reports, and roads built with these materials crumble within months. Citizens blame the weather or heavy vehicles, but the real reason is corruption. This finding angers Aisha because it reveals how corruption steals more than money. It steals safety, health, and dignity from ordinary people who pay taxes, expecting basic services in return. She schedules interviews with civil engineers and urban planners. Some agree to speak anonymously. Others refuse out of fear. One young engineer agrees to meet in a public park. He describes how asphalt mixtures are deliberately weakened and how supervisors accept bribes to sign off faulty construction. He shakes his head, saying that corruption is so common that many workers no longer recognize it as wrong. It has become a norm rather than an exception. This normalization of theft and deception disturbs Aisha deeply. As she organizes recordings and documents, she receives a call from her clerk source. His voice trembles. He says investigators are questioning employees about leaked documents and looking for him. He fears he might be arrested or fired. Aisha's heart tightens. She tells him to stay calm and avoid discussing anything at the office. She also suggests legal help through the Press Freedom Network. The clerk agrees and ends the call quickly. That night, Aisha cannot sleep. Her mind keeps returning to the clerk and others who risked their lives to give her information. She knows that threats against her sources are one of the most effective ways to silence journalists. She feels responsible for their safety, even though she cannot fully protect them. She wonders how many others have been silenced before a single headline ever reached the public. Days later, the third report is ready to publish. It documents the material supply chain, the corrupt inspection system, and the collapse of public infrastructure due to fraud. Aisha's editor sits with her in his office, reading the draft line by line. He takes off his glasses and rubs his eyes. He says that once they publish this, nothing will be the same. The businessmen, politicians, and officials will feel cornered and desperate. Aisha nods and replies that silence was never an option. They publish the third report early in the morning. The reaction is immediate again. Citizens take photos of broken roads, shattered sidewalks, and damaged bridges, blaming corruption rather than nature. The narrative has shifted. The public begins to see that corruption is not an abstract political scandal, but a force that ruins daily life and steals resources meant for them. At the same time, the threats become more violent. One evening, Aisha drives back from a meeting and notices that her brakes feel loose. She presses down and the pedal sinks with little resistance. Panic rushes through her. She pulls the handbrake and swerves into the side of an empty road, barely avoiding an accident. Shaken, she climbs out and inspects the car. A cable hangs loosely near the wheel, confirming that someone tampered with her vehicle. She calls her editor, then her press freedom contact. The next day, a mechanic confirms the sabotage. Aisha realizes that those she is fighting have escalated from intimidation to potential murder. She records every detail and sends evidence to her contacts. She refuses to hide or retreat. She posts a short video message online stating that she will not be silenced by cowards. Thousands share her message, calling her brave and fearless, but Aisha doesn't feel heroic. She feels tired, angry, but determined. After the car sabotage incident, Aisha begins to understand the full scale of the battle she has entered. She no longer doubts that the people she is exposing are willing to kill in order to protect their wealth, power, and reputation. She informs her editor that she plans to take additional precautions. He agrees and arranges for a security consultant to visit their office. The consultant explains how to recognize surveillance, how to change routes, and how to protect digital data. He also warns them that increased visibility provides some safety, but not absolute protection. Aisha listens carefully and stores every detail in her mind. Despite the danger, Aisha continues her work because she has started something larger than herself. Citizens across the country are now discussing corruption in ways they never did before. Teachers are demanding answers about fake schools. Doctors are questioning missing hospital funds, and engineers are refusing to sign fraudulent inspection reports. Her investigations have cracked the wall of silence, and through those cracks, truth is spilling into public consciousness. Meanwhile, the mastermind businessman and his allies are growing restless. They pressure media houses to attack Aisha's reputation. They spread rumors that she is funded by foreign governments, that she hates her own country, and that she seeks to destroy the economy. These accusations appear on television screens and online platforms, repeated with confidence by people who have never read her reports. Aisha does not respond publicly because she knows that engaging with propaganda only gives it strength. Instead, she focuses on facts. However, privately, the attacks begin to affect her. She reads hateful messages late at night and wonders why people defend those who steal from them. She sees comments accusing her of being anti-national and feels a sting because she loves her country more than those who plunder it for profit. She takes deep breaths and reminds herself that corruption survives by manipulating the public through lies and distractions. If powerful people convince citizens that honest journalists are enemies, they can continue stealing without resistance. International organizations begin paying closer attention. Reporters from Europe and North America contact Aisha, requesting background information on the story. Some express shock that such large-scale corruption has gone unpunished for so long. Others commend her bravery. Aisha appreciates their support, but knows that real change must come from inside her own country. External pressure helps, but it cannot replace internal accountability. One day, a representative from an international human rights organization visits the newsroom. She meets with Aisha and her editor and explains that they are monitoring threats against journalists worldwide. She states that Aisha's case has been flagged as high risk because of the attempted vehicle attack and ongoing legal harassment. She offers assistance, including legal advice, a safety grant, and relocation options if necessary. Aisha thanks her, but declines relocation for now. She believes running away would weaken the impact of her work and betray those who trust her. Not long after this meeting, Aisha receives new information from a surprising source. A junior accountant from a state-owned agency contacts her using an encrypted messaging platform. He writes that he has access to internal audits which prove that funds intended for public housing were redirected to offshore investments controlled by the same network. Aisha arranges a secure meeting in a crowded food bazaar, surrounded by vendors and customers. The accountant is nervous. He keeps checking over his shoulder as he hands her a small envelope with printed spreadsheets and handwritten notes. He whispers that he came forward because his sister lives in a slum and deserves a home built with public funds rather than empty promises. Aisha nods with gratitude and assures him that his identity will remain protected. Back at the office, she reviews the new documents. They show how money earmarked for the construction of affordable apartments was siphoned into shell firms that purchased foreign real estate, luxury vehicles, and private jets. The scale of theft is astonishing. It reveals that corruption is not only financial, but deeply moral. It deprives citizens of dignity by denying them shelter, health, education, and justice. Aisha prepares material for a fourth report, focusing on public housing and offshore laundering. Her editor warns her that this report will unleash the heaviest backlash yet, because housing projects involve multiple political factions and businessmen. Aisha replies that the public needs to know, even if the truth burns through powerful institutions. Her editor sighs and tells her that journalism sometimes resembles walking through fire, but someone must walk so that others may follow. As she organizes her findings, she receives a call from her Klimt source again. His voice trembles more than before. He says investigators have taken away some staff for questioning, and he fears his term is coming. Aisha feels her throat tighten. She tells him to stay silent about their communication. She sends his details to a legal protection group that helps whistleblowers. The group arranges a lawyer for him, but the fear remains. During this period, Aisha begins to feel the psychological toll of her work. She experiences nights when she cannot sleep and days when food tastes like paper. She tries to hide her exhaustion because she believes vulnerability will make her easier to break. But her editor notices the bags under her eyes and the slow pace of her typing. He tells her to take a day off. She refuses, saying the story cannot wait. He insists and orders everyone in the newsroom to go home early that day. Aisha walks through the city streets, watching people rush with groceries, children chase each other, vendors shout prices, and buses honk through intersections. She wonders how many of them know that their taxes are stolen, how many realize that corruption is the reason their roads are broken, their hospitals under-equipped, and their schools overcrowded. She feels sorrow because most citizens assume misfortune is inevitable rather than engineered by greedy elites. The next morning, she awakens with renewed clarity. She realizes the power of her work is not only exposing crime, but helping citizens understand the connection between corruption and daily suffering. Without awareness, there can be no accountability. Without accountability, there can be no reform. Without reform, the cycle continues forever. She vows to ensure that her reports connect facts to human consequences, not just numbers to names. When the fourth report is published, the reaction is stronger than anything before. Citizens living in informal settlements share the article and ask where their promised homes went. Activists organize rallies demanding housing audits. Opposition leaders quote Aisha's findings and speeches. Business allies of the mastermind businessman hold emergency press conferences to deny involvement. The government calls the report sensational and misleading, but refuses to provide evidence proving otherwise. High-profile activists and intellectuals amplify the report on social media, explaining how large-scale fraud can coexist with a seemingly functional bureaucracy. International media platforms highlight the story, along with the attempted car sabotage. Foreign governments issue statements urging protection for journalists. Civil society groups publish open letters demanding transparency. The mastermind businessman appears on a talk show claiming that he is being targeted by jealous competitors and that he has never stolen a single rupee from public funds. His words ring hollow because evidence has already reached the hands of investigators and analysts beyond his influence. Amid this chaos, Aisha receives a disturbing message. Her whistleblower, the junior accountant, has disappeared. His phone is switched off, his family cannot reach him, and no one knows where he was last seen. Aisha feels heavy panic settle in her chest. She fears he has been detained, threatened, or harmed because he dared to reveal the truth. She contacts human rights lawyers who begin searching for him through unofficial channels. She writes detailed notes about their meeting and submits them to legal organizations. A missing whistleblower is not just a tragedy, but a crime against public interest. Days pass without news of the accountant. Aisha struggles to focus. She blames herself for his disappearance, even though rationally, she knows the real blame lies with those who terrorize truth-tellers. Her editor reminds her that guilt is a weapon used by oppressors to break journalists. He insists that we must continue publishing, otherwise every whistleblower will vanish into silence with no record of their bravery. Aisha wipes her eyes and returns to her work, because surrender would dishonor the accountant's courage. At dawn, Elena rested in a small conference room inside the International Press Consortium building. The night had passed with analysts, legal experts, and investigative editors working tirelessly to authenticate, verify, and organize the mass of evidence she delivered. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, yet her mind remained sharply focused. She understood that this final phase could determine whether her work would change the nation or vanish under pressure from those who feared exposure. As sunlight crept through the tall glass windows, a senior editor approached Elena and Tomas, carrying several printed reports. He explained that the evidence had been verified through multiple independent channels. International forensic accountants traced the financial flows from government budgets to private offshore accounts. Investigators confirmed that whistleblower testimonies matched public procurement records and project budgets. Legal advisors agreed that the content could be published without violating international standards of accuracy. The editor placed the reports on the table, and Elena exhaled with a sense of cautious triumph. However, the battle was not yet over. A sudden alert appeared on television screens, mounted on the conference room walls. Government officials held an emergency press briefing, framing investigative journalists as destabilizing agents, accusing them of undermining national unity and collaborating with foreign powers. The spokesperson announced new restrictions on media activity, promising charges against anyone spreading what they labeled hostile information. Elena watched quietly, knowing these tactics were not meant to counter facts, but to intimidate citizens into silence. Tomas reacted with frustration, pacing the room, but Elena remained composed. She had expected this escalation and prepared for it. Meanwhile, the International Consortium prepared a coordinated publication strategy. The report would be released simultaneously across major global news outlets, paired with supporting documents, digital evidence, and testimony recordings. They would also submit a dossier to international anti-corruption bodies and humanitarian organizations, ensuring the matter reached diplomatic channels and legal institutions beyond the reach of corrupt officials. Elena understood that once these mechanisms activated, it would become nearly impossible for the corrupt network to bury the truth. By midday, the building became a hive of movement. Technical staff encrypted communication lines. Editors reviewed translations for multiple regions. Analysts synchronized publication timers. Lawyers drafted statements anticipating legal attacks. The air vibrated with urgency, but also with purpose. Elena contributed where needed, describing context for certain interviews, clarifying the sequence of events, adding missing details, and answering questions from lawyers and advocacy groups. During a brief break, Elena stepped into a quiet balcony overlooking the city. Streets bustled with traffic, pedestrians hurried between offices and markets, children in school uniforms waited for buses. The ordinary rhythm of life continued, unaware that a revelation capable of reshaping politics and public trust was hours away. Elena felt a strange combination of isolation and connection. She had endured threats, surveillance, and fear for months for the sake of people who did not yet know she existed, but she did not resent them. She believed journalism served those who rarely had a voice in decisions that shaped their future. Her thoughts drifted to the villagers, teachers, doctors, and families she had interviewed. She recalled children carrying containers of water for long distances because infrastructure plans had been sabotaged by corrupt officials who diverted funds. She remembered an elderly farmer who handed her faded documents showing land that was supposed to receive irrigation channels but remained barren year after year. She remembered the nurse who cried quietly while describing patients turned away due to lack of equipment. These memories became her fuel and her shield against despair. Back inside the building, tensions rose. Government vehicles were spotted near independent newsrooms around the city, and several domestic journalists were reportedly detained for questioning. The consortium activated emergency protocols, relocating digital assets to cloud servers outside national jurisdiction and contacting international legal defenders. Elena checked her own contingency emails, ensuring they remained active. If she was arrested or disappeared within 24 hours, the entire archive would automatically dispatch to dozens of watchdog organizations, diplomatic offices, and foreign news networks. In the late afternoon, the senior editor returned to the conference room and informed everyone that publication would begin in 3 hours. Elena felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment she had chased since she first opened dusty procurement files in remote municipal offices. It was also the moment her enemies feared most. She realized that once the report was public, she could no longer return to her old life. Her work would make her a target, but also a symbol. Tomas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and promised they would protect her with every resource they had. As the countdown continued, Elena prepared a short statement to accompany the release. Her words needed to be clear, courageous, and grounded in evidence. She wrote without punctuation as her mind flowed, acknowledging whistleblowers, activists, citizens, and fellow journalists who risked their safety for truth. She emphasized that the investigation was not an attack on the nation, but a defense of its people against exploitation. She urged readers to question power, demand transparency, and refuse to be manipulated by officials who hid behind nationalist rhetoric to protect personal wealth. When she finished drafting the statement, the senior editor scanned it and gave a nod of approval. Minutes before publication, an urgent message arrived. Security teams monitoring local networks detected chatter suggesting attempts to launch cyber attacks against consortium servers. The building shifted into emergency alert. Digital teams rerouted systems, fortified encryption, and mirrored data to foreign backups. Even if the primary servers were compromised, multiple fail-safes ensured that publication would continue. Tomas watched over the operation with focused intensity, reminding staff that the corrupted elite would do anything to silence truth. Finally, as the clock reached 0, the consortium launched the coordinated release. The report exploded across global news sites, investigative platforms, advocacy channels, and social media feeds. Complete documents and verification records appeared alongside compelling testimonies and immersive data visualizations. Analysts explained money trails, activists shared real experiences, legal experts weighed in on potential charges, and human rights groups condemned the systemic theft that harmed citizens. The story could no longer be contained. Within minutes, shockwaves rippled across the nation. Citizens began questioning officials with newfound confidence. Social media flooded with reactions from teachers, doctors, engineers, parents, and workers demanding accountability. Hashtags spread rapidly, and public outrage grew. Government officials scrambled to respond. Some denied involvement, others blamed bureaucratic errors. A few disappeared from public view altogether. Opposition leaders demanded inquiries. International organizations issued statements calling for independent investigations and freezing of foreign assets tied to corruption. Elena understood that change would not happen overnight, but momentum now moved in favor of accountability. Elena remained inside the building under protection as threats intensified, but her spirit stayed unshaken. She communicated with activists, answered questions from international reporters, and assisted legal teams preparing to defend whistleblowers. She knew the road ahead would be long, with attempts to rewrite narratives, suppress investigations, and intimidate witnesses. But she also knew a firewall of global attention now guarded the truth. Late that night, Elena sat alone at the balcony again, staring at the quiet city lights. She finally allowed herself to breathe deeply. She knew there might be exile ahead, or courtroom battles, or continued danger, but she also knew she had fulfilled her responsibility. The nation had seen its reflection, and the world had seen evidence of betrayal against ordinary citizens. She whispered to herself that journalism was never about fame or comfort, but about standing in the space where truth meets power and refusing to step aside. She made a silent promise that no matter where life took her, she would continue to defend that space for as long as she could.